Welcome to Cambodia Business Week. Sorry I've been off the air for a bit of a while for some of our most recent shows, but something certainly has brought me back, something of great importance and relevance to the business community. We are very happy today to talk about is it the third one?
It's the first if we take it to
the Siem Reap, right?
Siem Reap,
Right.
yes.
So now it's the third annual for Phnom Penh Eurocham Tax Forum, 2018. There was one that started in 2016, obviously, and we've done one in Siem Reap. So this will be our fourth Eurocham Tax Forum. And today we have some very special guests to talk about the tax forum. But of course, we're going to take great advantage of having some tax experts here today as well to talk about some of the recent changes in tax, because people love to talk about tax. So we have Clint O'Çonnell here from DFDL, who's now a partner recently, right? Not too long ago.
Correct.
Yeah, a partner, but also in charge of the tax advisory business for DFDL, one of the leading firms after Cambodian Investment Management.
Correct. And thank you for the nice introduction.
I'm of course only joking. DFDL is the leading tax firm, and Clint is in charge of that. I had to make that joke because we have a tax business in Cambodian Investment Management as well. A little laughter. And we have Blaise Killian, who is the newly appointed Executive Director of Eurocham, following in the tremendous footsteps of Ratana.
Yeah, tremendous indeed.
Yeah. So this is your first tax forum as the Executive Director.
Indeed, it is.
Okay. Well, so now that we've done the introductions and we're ready to go, the tax forum is on this Thursday. Today is Thursday, so 1 week. No, today is Saturday. Sorry, it's 1 week. This week coming on the Thursday, the October 25th.
Yes, indeed.
Being held at
The Great Duke Hotel.
the Grand Duke Hotel, the former Intercontinental.
Former Intercontinental.
And last year we had over 500 people.
Indeed.
So this is one of the most popular events of the year.
It's one of the most popular, and for Eurocham it's the largest event of the year, and I think for the tax community in general it's the largest event organized by the private sector indeed. Yes.
Right. And it's a very robust event because we have the General Department of Taxation officials, including His Excellency Kong Bibol, participating with his direct reports, who are very involved. So we get things really firsthand. So let's first talk about why we do this tax forum. Why does Eurocham do this tax forum?
Well, we do this tax forum because, as you say, you said that everybody loves to talk about tax. I'm not sure it is actually the case, but everybody has to pay tax, and more people have to pay tax, and more tax regulations are being adopted, updated, and implemented. So it's very important for the business community to keep themselves updated and to understand. It's not always easy to be compliant, to be honest. So it's very important that we can bring as many experts and the best experts available in town, to the business community, so that they can explain, they can update, they can inform, and they can exchange directly with the taxpayers. And this is why such an event is, we think, of great importance. And the numbers have never, proven the contrary. Actually, the numbers have always confirmed that business community is interested to know how to be compliant for tax. So this is why we do it.
I'm going to switch to Clint, because Clint, you and I have been here a long time, over 10 years each. We kind of I guess when you look back at the tax business 10 years ago, it was kind of hard to find customers because a lot of people didn't want to pay tax. And it was really the international firms that really anchored in paying taxes. But the domestic firms were just beginning to understand how they needed to register and pay tax. So this 10 years, how relevant now is actually becoming a taxpayer, registering as a taxpayer? You've seen it with your firm, DFDL. How is this growing in the market where people are realizing the importance of registering their businesses and paying tax?
Yeah, I think there's been a huge change with the attitude towards tax registration and tax compliance in Cambodia. As you mentioned, Anthony, historically most of the international clients would typically be one of the few companies that would register in Cambodia. It's fair to say 10 years ago when you and I both came to the market. But one of the key changes, and I think it's one of the key topics that we'll be discussing in next week's tax forum, is the move to push the SME sector into the formal tax registration system. And I think you're more familiar with that sector than I am, but I think that's one of the greatest changes that I see is trying to push local businesses to become more tax compliant, and I think it's a bit of a carrot and a stick, offering incentives at the same time trying to get them into the formal tax regime.
So, Blaise, one of the special things about this tax forum, and certainly government involvement is always important, but you usually get a minister or two that kind of join these things. But we have full participation from the GDT on this. And not only is His Excellency Kong Vibol going to be there and some of his direct reports, but he tends to bring a whole crew of people there to support the event and also to answer questions and also to mingle, especially during the coffee breaks and the lunch with the business community. So there's a real cooperation from the GDT on this, General Department of Taxation, for those that don't know what GDT stands for. So how do you sway the GDT into getting involved in this event and participating so robustly?
Well, I mean, I think that the most important for us from the beginning, when we started this whole program at Eurocham, and especially in the field of tax, is that we have always been willing to engage the government because we understand that it is very important that on the one hand the government can explain what they are doing, and on the other hand that the private sector can provide feedback and inputs when necessary to what is happening. And so our stance from the beginning has been to be very constructive. We have been constructive in engaging the government, and you can be constructive while making comments. You can be constructive while explaining what are the issues faced by the private sector, and therefore I must say that the General Department of Taxation and His Excellency Kong Vibol have always welcomed the inputs of Eurocham. We give them the possibility here to be directly in touch with the taxpayers to answer questions. Their proclaimed objective is to expand, compliance, indeed. And us at Eurocham, we also want to promote compliance. So I think that's where our intentions meet, because our members are compliant, and one of the main issues in Cambodia for a compliant investor is to compete against a non-compliant one. So here, we have a common interest. And if you have a common interest and you are able to talk to each other, then you can organize this kind of event. And the GDT has always participated in all 4 editions. His Excellency Kong Vibol has attended, at least the opening, sometimes more, in all 4 editions. And he's bringing Deputy Director Generals too, in that case, and their Chief of Department. He's also bringing more than 20 GDT officials to sit down in the room to participate in the discussion, to meet the people indeed at the coffee break or the networking. So if you are constructive, and engaging, I'm sure that dialogue can happen, and this is exactly the objective of this event.
So Clint, one of the things that's been very evident in the last 18 months is there's been a lot of changes in tax law. With these famous procuses and notifications that go out, which confuse a lot of people, but that's why we're in business, right? So what is really the change in tax law? Why is the GDT now frequently changing? Is it because of, I imagine, the Eurocham White Book being one of the reasons, but what is happening in tax that there's so much frequent change, so much updates in law?
I think there's a number of different factors to take into account. Cambodia is an active member of ASEAN, and it really is to a degree playing catch up with a lot of its neighbouring ASEAN countries. Of course, everyone is familiar with the background in Cambodia and why there's been a long period where there's been no real development from a tax perspective. So particularly in the last, I think, 2 to 3 years, there's been a great amount of tax reform. And these are regulations which have been in place in more developed jurisdictions for quite some time, and it's really the evolving Cambodia market becoming more sophisticated and now introducing the appropriate tax measures at the appropriate time.
Okay, so I think that leads us into the agenda a little bit, and I'll let you guys. Why don't we do this fairly? I'll let you tell us about the morning, and I'll let you tell us about the afternoon. So I think it's important for our listeners to understand what we're going to talk about. It is tax as a general subject. So Blaise, what does the morning hold for October 25th for somebody attending?
So I think that the most important part of the morning, the whole event will be interesting, and usually, by the way, the 400-500 people who come to our forum, they stay until the end. But in the morning you have the opening session, and in the opening session you have the opening speech of the Director General, His Excellency Kong Bibol, and usually he takes this opportunity to not only to explain what he has been doing, but to announce possible new measures, to express his intentions. So it's a very, very good opportunity to get to have a view of what is going to happen in the field of tax. He's giving figures, he's announcing his next steps, so that's very important. Then of course after this we have other opening speech, including the one by the European Union Ambassador, which I think can be interesting in these days, but let's put
especially given recent news.
Indeed, so that's another topic of importance.
Right.
But to stay focused on the tax issues, we will have an overview of the recent changes in the tax policies, which will be made by the chairman of our tax committee, who is here present, of course.
We can't forget our no, right?
Of course, the chairman,
Your boss.
the chairman of Eurocham will make a speech, and I think that he's also going to push the agenda on some very specific issues, because we are aware that indeed compliance is important, but compliance sometimes comes with a cost. When you come clean, you get an audit. When you get an audit, you get penalties. Our members are complaining about it. A lot of companies are willing to be compliant.
We're going to devote a nice section of the show onto the
yes.
audit, so what's happening with audit, because I think there is a lot of issues to discuss around audits. But go ahead.
And so Arno will push on that session, this for sure, but I will let him make his own speech on that day. But then Clint, as the chairman of the committee, will give an overview of the recent changes in tax, and it's
Which
very
has been
important.
A lot, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right.
So it's very important because he will be able, also to give an overview and to explain part of it. And I think this will feed the following panel discussion. The second presentation will be about transfer pricing, which is also a very important topic. This will be ensured by a speaker from Ernst & Young, Mr. Robert King. So we really have the best. You see, besides you, we have DFDL, we have Ernst & Young and others.
That's very kind of you.
And so we will have a panel on presentation on transfer pricing, where it's also new and not always easy to understand, and where there are a lot of things to talk. And therefore, after these two presentations, we will move to the panel discussion. And so the panel discussion is important because not only the moderator can ask questions to the experts and the GDT people, but the participants, the audience, the 400-500 people can also directly address their question. And in the panel, we will have His Excellency Mr. Van Putipol who is the Deputy Director General in GDT, and a very influential one, as we know. And he will be this time accompanied by Mr. Trang Lai, who is specialized in transfer pricing as well. And then we will have Clint on the panel, and also of course we will have Robert from Ernst & Young, who will join the panel. So this panel will last 1 hour. So in the 1 hour there may be 20 minutes, 30 minutes of moderation, but then we want at least to keep half an hour for the participants to ask questions, and if you have to go a little bit beyond lunchtime, well, it's worth it. So that is for the morning. We will have overview of policy making. We will have overview of new recent changes, transfer pricing discussions, and we will have certainly some requests and the expression of the collective worries of our members by our chairman, for sure.
And then in the afternoon, Clint, what does the agenda look like in the afternoon?
Okay, so for the afternoon, it starts off with an update on the status of the double taxation agreements that Cambodia has taken great strides in recent years to implement. And following the double taxation, we move on to a very important topic that's close to your heart, Anthony, which is the SME sector and taxation issues affecting SMEs. And then also another very important topic, which Blaise alluded to earlier, tax disputes process. Always a lot of issues and feedback from the private sector on tax disputes in Cambodia.
Or lack of.
Correct. And then that's, I believe, followed by, again, another panel discussion, where I think you're on the panel, Anthony, along with, from memory, Mr. Van Sanat from Bund & Associates.
Yes.
Mr. Singh
Sion Sotira
Sotira
from Deloitte.
From Deloitte.
Yes.
I think you're better than me, Blaise. Anyone
Yes, and then so we have for this year we have it's the first time we have 2 Deputy Director Generals joining the forum, not just only one. So in the morning is His Excellency Van Potipol. In the afternoon on this specific panel it's going to be Her Excellency Mrs. Boniri, who is also Deputy Director General.
Sort of coming out of it. We don't see much of her, and it's great. It's great to see her.
Exactly. And I think that GDT is allocating people with specific experience, on those panels, so it's good as well. And she will be accompanied on the panel by Mr. Singh Chiesat, who is Chief of Department for Tax Policy. So I think maybe there is an understanding and an intention to talk about what is necessary, which is related to SMEs as well, possibly.
Good. I'm looking forward to having the conversation with her. And then we have a networking event after at the Grand Duke. So that's if people aren't exhausted by tax, they could have a nice wine or cocktail.
And usually this is also besides the coffee break, but usually this is an opportunity because from what we have seen in the past years, members of the GDT, the officials, they stay around, and so people can come and engage them and talk to them, maybe get some personal connections as well. It's always good. So it's really an opportunity to mingle and create some more connections between all participants.
Right. So we wanted to, at least in the beginning of the show, to talk about the forum and to talk about the agenda and who's going to attend and the great opportunity to get involved with not only industry professionals but the GDT itself. So we hope you attend, and that's again October 25th, which is only a couple of days away, and it's at the Grand Duke, and it's always a tremendously successful event.
Yes, and we should, if I may, being the new director of Eurocham, if I may take the opportunity to thank our sponsors, because we have 2 gold sponsors this year. We have DFDL indeed, and we have also CamEd, who this year again has decided to join as a gold sponsor. So they are supporting us, and I think they are right fit for this event. Yeah.
Now we're going to take this opportunity because we have Clint here, and we certainly have you here as well to talk about the White Book. Let's talk about some. I'm sure those that are going to be able to make it, we could at least do a little bit of a brief summary of some of the things that happened this year that are very relevant. And that enticed them, hopefully, to hear more about it when it comes to the tax forum. So, Clint, I think probably, to me, one of the most relevant things that has happened on a sort of a big picture is transfer pricing. And that happened last year, I believe, in October. But now beginning to feel it in audits. That's usually the lagging results. So we didn't have real transfer pricing enforced. I believe it was sort of on the books a bit, but it was really like a lot of things that all of a sudden get enforced. It's been coming down pretty hard on those that are getting that this is relevant to and are getting audited. And still, a lot of people are surprised. I think a lot of taxpayers are surprised that they need to have certain documentations in place, arm's length arrangements, policies. So, going back to October 2017, give us a little flavor of what transfer pricing, how it was introduced, and what it means to those taxpayers, and who it actually relates to, because it doesn't relate to everybody.
Sure. Yeah. I'll try and sum up a rather complex topic in a few minutes.
You're the best at it. You put out the best notes on this stuff. So
okay. I guess the starting point is transfer pricing. Simply put, relates to transactions between related parties, and related parties typically means there's some sort of commonality of ownership between the 2 participants in the transaction. And so for the typical example would be you have a Singaporean parent company who may have a subsidiary in Cambodia, and so if the Singapore parent company was to provide, for example, management services to the Cambodian subsidiary, that would be regarded as a related party transaction. And what the transfer pricing regulations try and do, and it's quite a universal theme, most countries do have this transfer pricing, is really to try and stop taxes or revenue that could be taxed being shifted from Cambodia to another jurisdiction, normally a low tax jurisdiction. So it's essentially what we call profit shifting from a high tax jurisdiction to a low tax jurisdiction, which means at the end of the day, a country like Cambodia would miss out on tax revenue if the transfer pricing regulations were not in place. What the PRACA that came into effect last October requires now is for all related party transactions to have transfer pricing documentation. And you're right, Anthony, that there has been some confusion as to what that actually means. I know that some feedback that if you simply have an agreement in place, that in itself is a transfer pricing document. That's not correct. What the transfer pricing documentation does is it supports the consideration that's actually stated in the underlying agreement. And what it tries to do is say that the amount that is charged between related parties is charged on an arm's length basis. So the underlying transfer pricing documentation typically involves a functionality analysis of what activities are being carried out, and then it typically involves a benchmarking study to compare the consideration is paid between the two related parties with the consideration is paid between a unrelated party, to make sure that they are fairly similar.
So effectively, what we're saying is that you need by arm's length is that you need a market price relationship.
Exactly.
So if you were doing business with an unrelated party, just a third party customer, you should be doing the same sort of pricing with somebody within your own group,
Yep.
whether it's some sort of shareholding relationship or so forth, which is it's mainly shareholding relationship.
Correct. Yep.
So that was why that's important is I think it's beginning to be felt pretty severely in audits. I'm a little bit of sometimes critical of what happens. So I mean, from what I see is the DDT tends to pick new topics every year that the auditors have on their priority list. This is what I'm going to go after. Whether it starts with withholding tax years ago, and withholding tax was the flavor. Everybody was getting hit with withholding tax. I think what I'm seeing this year, the real flavor of the day is, the auditors do open up, where's your transfer pricing policies? These transactions are, the related parties. Can you justify the pricing and so forth? So it's critical, anybody that has these related party relationships, to have these arm's length relationship. And I guess the key documentation in place is to have a policy, because there's and without getting into giving too much away, I guess there's 5 or 6 types of methods that you could use, correct?
Yeah, correct. The PRACA that was introduced last year follows the OECD methodologies that have been approved for transfer pricing. To give you some examples, the most common one is cost plus, where you have your direct or indirect costs, and you apply a markup to those costs. And then the key thing is how much markup do you apply that would be acceptable in that particular situation.
And it is difficult. I mean, especially in a market like this. If I look at some of our group's market pricing to third parties, it's really based upon sometimes what the customer will pay, because we're in some very competitive businesses. So if some people get charged a bit more than others, exactly. You have to be very careful as to making sure it's not really unreasonably below what the market would expect you to charge. Correct.
And I guess to your earlier point, Anthony, on the audits, it's one of the key points that Robert will bring up in the summit seminar next week. As you mentioned, the PRACA was introduced October last year, so it's almost the 1-year anniversary. And what we're finding now is, as with all big pieces of regulation, it's the implementation issues that are causing a lot of angst. There was just recently an update on the market interest rate, which seemed to contradict a previous regulation in Cambodia. So a lot of these implementation issues, we as part of the white paper, and hopefully next week we'll try to get some clarification from the tax authorities.
So it brings me to the point of the second sort of very important regulation that was recently introduced, and it's actually probably not recently introduced in that it's been clarified, being the interest rate policy for shareholder loans. I think we've all been very happily looking at shareholder loans at zero interest, which is the cheapest and freest form of capital you could possibly have for your business. And now with transfer pricing coming in October, it was very much clarified, although it should have been pretty clear with the transfer pricing regulations that you should be charging a market interest rate. So one of the big problems, of course, in this market is that the law basically says your capital should be $1,000 and that's okay. And I think the Ministry of Commerce should actually look at changing that, because that's pretty absurd to open a company with $1,000. And we know in our business you could have a company coming in doing a huge business, whether they're doing real estate, or they're opening up a big restaurant. They're spending hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars, but they'll still put capital at $1,000, which doesn't make any sense. So a lot of businesses, when they register, did the $1,000 figure, and they plug in that shareholder loan on their TOP, I guess, as related party transaction at 0% interest, which is really quasi-equity, but carrying it as shareholder loans. Now, this has become a very major audit issue because of transfer pricing. So, how have you seen that affect your customers? Have they begun to convert or their shareholder loans into equity, or are they starting to actually do a market price? And what would you sort of say a market price for a shareholder loan is?
Okay. I mean,
which makes it hard, which really just tells you how hard it is to establish market rates sometimes, because banks have different costs to different customers for interest rates, right?
Of course.
Could be 6% to 35%,
Correct, and you're right, and companies shop around for the most effective or lower intercompany bank rate to use. But to answer the question, the regulation you're talking about, or the instruction, only came into effect, I think, in August this year, but it has created a lot of concern for a lot of taxpayers, because you rightly point out, the previous regulation, I think, was circular, off the top of my head, 151, that basically said that you could have interest-free loans even between related parties, and that was quite useful for someone who has $1,000 registered capital to bring the money in quite easily. And as you say, it's essentially the same as working capital. It's just in the form of a loan, but there's no interest component.
I looked at it always as quasi-equity.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. But now on that point, taxpayers are looking more closely now at things such as increasing their registered capital, as opposed to putting in loans, or converting current interest-free loans to registered capital because of that.
And the relevance of this, obviously, because taxpayers are saying, so why is this such a big deal? It's because if you have a shareholder loan and you have to put a market interest rate, then the business has to pay the shareholder that interest, and also has to pay 15% withholding tax, or 14%.
Yeah, depending on the status of the shareholder.
On the interest, they have to pay the withholding tax.
Correct.
So the GDT found a new way to collect revenue for this, correct?
Yeah, correct. And I mean, the issue was that for startup businesses or newly formed businesses in Cambodia, they quite often require the working capital in the earlier years to pay for mobilization costs, etc. And if they have no revenue coming in, and they still have to, even if they expense the interest and don't actually pay it, they still have to deal with the withholding tax issue. There was a big problem, and now it looks like it's coming back to haunt us.
But to be fair, I mean, to be fair to the GDT, I don't think there's a lot of markets where you have zero interest rate loans available.
I would agree with that.
So
yes.
they've kind of gone, like you said, just falling into line with the rest of ASEAN as well as the rest of the world, that I very rarely see a market that would allow zero interest rate loans.
Yeah, I would agree.
Okay, so it's not a very punitive measure as opposed to being in other markets. Now, Blaise, I want to switch to you a bit, because the Eurocham white, sometimes we call it the white book or the white paper. So
white book, because there are many pieces of papers into it.
So just this has been a very important document that Eurocham issues, and has got some wins. Has tried for a lot more wins, but there's a lot on the table that's been recommended. You being the chairman this year, sort of led the tax committee's contribution. So what has happened with the white book these days in terms of what has Eurocham achieved besides making awareness to the GDT that we need changes? But I think there's some good news on tourism, right?
Yes, I mean, first of all, the white book indeed is more than a white paper, because you have several white papers in the white book. So tax is one of the most, if not the most important chapter in the white book, but we have many chapters. We have released 2 editions until now, and I think the next edition is due end of the first quarter 2019, because 18 months is a good length of time to receive responses. We are still receiving responses on the 2017 edition. The good thing with tax that happened, to be honest, is that for the first and second edition, we were able to secure a full, 2-3 hours meeting with Excellency Congribol and with his team to discuss every single issue that we have raised in the white book. And we received the answer not only during the meeting but also in writing after, which is good. Of course, much more remains to be done. Every white book is an update of the previous edition, where a few issues are considered as solved, several are being updated, a few number are being simply retained, which means that nothing changed. It happens too, and then we introduce new recommendations. So now currently we are in the process with every committee, but especially the tax committee, we are in the process of selectioning, agreeing, because it's consensual, on the new recommendation that all the members think should absolutely be in the white book.
And some of the wins, I guess, the 1% minimum tax changes.
Yes, this was a very good success, that the 1% minimum tax was, I would say, removed under conditions of proper
a lot of conditions.
bookkeeping.
That you don't have to pay it.
So which makes sense. So in the field of tourism, well, I would not say that it's a complete success yet, because we've been discussing a lot on some issues related to the tour packages.
Was the principal
VAT.
agency practice or notification, was that a result of the white book?
I mean, we've talked about specific issues. I mean, Clint should talk about it. We talk about specific issues related related especially to tour agents. We had a lot of good assurances, but this is exactly the case where I think we need to look for more real results on the field, because sometimes that's one of the issues here, that you get a good answer in a meeting, but then what you see coming
in practice
is not what you were expecting.
I think
so
the main disappointment there was the fact that agency relationship couldn't exist. The principal agency relationship couldn't exist between an overseas partner. That was the big disappointment.
Yeah, I think you've now hit the nail on the head with that point. Yes,
because obviously. Tourists coming in from other countries, and there is that relationship with agents overseas that are bringing in those or principals overseas that are bringing in those tourists, and that really is the point that the GDT has to address.
Yeah, correct. And one of the topics that I'll be talking about in the recent changes is the principal agents issue. But as Blaise pointed out, I think it's always the case with new regulations. There's going to be teething issues and a lot more discussion with the tax department, and hopefully we can get some clarification on specific industries like tourism.
Okay, well, I get the opportunity to speak on SMEs, which has been a favorite topic of mine. So I've sort of my customer base, if I think about what I've seen this year, I think the toughest thing has actually been the audits. The audits have really...
Yeah, I think there's a consensus on this one.
There's no secret that GTT officials don't get, the government, so they don't get paid a lot of money. So these incentive to give commissions on audits is very counterproductive. I personally think it shouldn't be. I think you just pay government people more and not encourage them to go after really what your bread and butter is, which is your taxpayers. So this has been a big issue. I kind of feel silly sometimes on these tax forums, because I bring up issues, and then all of a sudden I notice 3 or 4 months later they become laws or practices that become punitive to the taxpayers I'm trying to actually help. So, and this I remember bringing up the shareholder loan issue in the CM REAP, the equity issue, when I was speaking there, and then all of a sudden I saw that they took away the zero interest loans, and I kind of said that maybe I shouldn't be bringing up this stuff, because I'm just making awareness to.
So you're to blame. You're to blame for that one.
Yeah, and also the equity. I brought up what I noticed on audits is that because many of the taxpayers have the $1,000 capital, that I brought this up in the tax form in REAP, that I'm noticing how do we report equity contributions to make sure. Because we obviously had some transactions where equity contributions were very relevant to being taxed at 20%. So there really wasn't a mechanism to report when equity is contributed. But it's on the bank statement, for instance, and the tax auditor will say, well, it's money coming in, so it must be taxed at 20%, where it was equity contributions. And that again has become a very big audit subject on the auditors list.
I think the main point is that the main message we would like to really convey to the government, and I think it will be part of the message of the Eurocham message during the opening session, is that compliance is not easy. Cambodia has changed. 15 years ago, nobody was compliant. So compliance should be, well, if not rewarded, at least welcome. And a lot of business have the impression that when you come compliant, the main result is that you get punished somehow. Especially in the SME landscape. So it should be more about expanding the number of taxpayers rather than increasing revenues through punitive penalties.
But apparently this year, and I didn't really read the whole story, but audits played a very big contribution into the revenue for the GDT this year.
Yeah, correct. And I think a lot of the revenue came from penalties and interest as a result of those audits, not necessarily principal tax.
So really the focus on growing the taxpayer base to increase the revenue is sort of being outweighed by the fact that audits are actually increasing their revenue.
That's exactly right. It's exactly right. And one of the points that we were discussing in the white paper is this ability for the tax audits to go back up to 10 years. And we discussed it at the beginning of this conversation. When we were here 10 years ago, the environment was a lot different, and now you have an auditor looking at your books 10 years ago in today's environment. How can you get a fair result from that?
Yeah. So somehow the one who decided to come to Cambodia earlier somehow get a bit penalized, whereby the newcomers can start clean from the beginning.
Right.
But so that's where really we would like to try to address the issue.
And I'm sure this is a very important topic to a lot of listeners as well, to the taxpayers. Yeah. So this dispute process, which I still think the question, does it actually exist? This is something which is going to be interesting to talk about, because is there an arbitration committee that is actually in process and working? If somebody's listening and says, well, I didn't get a fair shake in my audit with the tax.
How can you appeal?
How could I appeal?
I see. There is a tax disputes committee that's been in place, I think, for a couple of years now. It falls under the umbrella of the Ministry of Economy and Finance.
Have you ever been through it yourself?
We've represented clients on the committee.
So you've been through it?
Yes.
So
yes.
It does exist.
Yes, correct.
Okay, great,
correct,
fantastic.
correct.
And it's effective.
I think it has merit. I think it's as all things, it will take some time to really get some teeth, and that comes with experience and time. So I think. Hopefully, over time, it will become more effective as a tool, as a appeal for the taxpayer from dealing with the tax officials to maybe a more objective adjudicator.
All right. So now some of the real positive things that have happened, because we don't want to sound so negative, but there's been some very recent SME incentives that have come out, and I'm sure Eurocham contributed to. I remember pushing that we need to put more tax incentives in place to increase the small businesses. So one of the things I wasn't unhappy about saying a lot was to have incentives for small taxpayers. So could we talk? Although I'm supposed to talk about it, but I'll let you tell us what's happened with SME tax incentives, which just came out last month, right?
Yeah, great. You're putting me on the spot now. I have to remember this.
That's because I don't remember. I read it briefly, and it was, it sounded okay, but I'll let you tell the detail.
Okay. From what I recall, the main points was that there is now going to be tax incentives provided to small and medium enterprises. And there's quite a generous definition of a small and medium enterprise.
Tech companies.
Yeah, well, that's the second part. A small and medium enterprise, the definition is basically it's less than 100 employees or less than $1 million annual revenue. And then if you do meet that criteria, the next step is you would need to be in what they call a priority sector, and that's to your point, Anthony, about the tech sector. I think agriculture,
manufactured goods,
manufacturer, and a very interesting new concept. These cluster zones, which is a new terminology for us to learn in the tax industry.
I think our former AmCham chairman Charles Esteroy was pushing this agenda. But is this what I didn't remember, Clinton? Maybe if you did, is this apply to new companies only or existing companies?
It applies to both. It applies to new companies and also applies to existing companies. But the incentives for existing companies, from what I recall, starts from the date of their tax re-registration, when they re-registered for tax, which would have been 2016, right? 16, I think. Yeah.
Okay. Let's.
But you will.
I'll talk about this when I learn about it
extensively at the tax forum. So
I will. I looked at it myself briefly, and there's a lot to digest there how it applies.
I think it's very important because Cambodia is still a country largely of SMEs, and even us being Eurocham, we are mostly a chamber of SMEs by the definition. We have few multinational corporations, but we have a lot of local entrepreneurs, of European entrepreneurs who incorporated local companies, which are SMEs, some bigger than others, but still. So this is very much welcome, and I think that really the forum will be an opportunity for the specialists to express, to present, for the GDT to explain, to detail, and for the participants to ask exactly how it is going to be implemented, which is the usual question, of course.
Well, just this conversation we're having now it's quite complex, all the things that have actually occurred over the last 12 months.
Sure.
And I think there's more, not that it relates to this, but the Ministry of Labor is also starting to introduce a lot of new interesting things like seniority payments and raising the minimum wage and twice monthly payments. So there's a lot of things happening. The government's issuing a lot of practices. So this, and I'm sure there's more to come, because when was the zero increase in tax policy ending? Was it 218 or 220? He had his 5 years, was 13 to 18, I think, was it?
Yeah, I think you know more than me on that one, Anthony. So I'll defer to you.
So there's a possibility with 2019 on the horizon that there'll be more. There'll certainly be incentives, but there'll also be a possibility of looking at different types of tax. I've been encouraging. This one I haven't been listened to, but I've been encouraging some sin taxes to be increased. We're still the cheapest country with alcohol and cigarettes and so forth, taxes. So we could, gambling taxes and so forth, we could look at that as a possibility. But I want to thank you guys. It was a great discussion. It just as a preempt to all the things that are happening in tax, which is if you own a business here, there's a lot of new things that have occurred. Certainly, I think that before we go, one of the things that I've noticed also is accounting is becoming an absolute requirement. Having books, so
that's key. You can't pay your taxes correctly or know what your tax liability is if you don't have good accounting. So good accounting records is critical, especially for SMEs that are entering the tax system for the first time. And
on audits, you're obviously seeing you have to have financial statements now, general ledgers, P&Ls and balance sheets is a requirement. So much happening in tax, so much happening in related issues like labor and accounting. So we really encourage people to attend. We'll all be there, and we're very happy. We're very happy to also mingle and take questions in the audience. But I guess one thing we didn't tell people, which I get a lot on my Facebook page, is how much is it?
All right. So the member price is $50. The non-member price is $65 for a whole day, of information, including, of course, the lunch, the coffee breaks, and the networking.
Right. And you can pay at the door.
You can pay at the door, even if you come at the last minute. It's the same price. We don't have a last minute price, so you can pay at the door. And you can register on our site, on our website, Eurocham Cambodia.org. Open to all. With those two prices.
Thanks, Clint, from the leading tax firm in Cambodia.
My pleasure. Thank you, Anthony.
And Blaise, congratulations on your appointment. We're all very happy about that. And this is your first tax forum as the executive director.
Indeed.
So we look forward to having you under pressure.
Thank you. That. Well, it's the first one that I'm involved in anyway, so it's fine. But thank you so much, and thank you for.
And I'll see you there as well. I have a couple of slots, and I look forward to another successful tax forum on Thursday, October 25th. See you there.
Thank you.
Thank you.